Thank you so very much, and it's great fun to be here, and I love the border. When I was head of environmental health, basically for the United States, when I was at CDC, I came to the border a number of times. We had the Border Health Commission along with EPA, CDC, and NIH, and I traveled along the border for almost a week with David Satcher when he was director of CDC at the time, all the way from Brownsville to Juarez to, and then when I was in California, we supported a lot of the work at the border. I'd like to mention the two books for just a minute. This book, Making Healthy Places, is the textbook I use at UCLA, and I require that in my class I have half design and planning students or environment students and half public health students. And at the second class I do speed dating. And so they have to match up with someone from the other side to do a joint presentation. And so every 2 minutes they'd have to quickly say their interest. Well, at the end of it, a young woman who was coming from public health was interested in violence prevention and injuries to women and how one would work on and design that. And the young man was working on a transit-oriented development. They call them a TOD, where trolley stops and that sort of thing. And they worked and presented, and all of a sudden she began to realize, the public health person, that everything you're looking at was in somebody's head at some point. And the world is basically, we live in a created environment. We live in a world that is the product of people's imaginations and thinking. And the major problems we have as a society is inadequate imagination. And the young man didn't realize that how you build could either put people in danger and risk, or could make them feel much more comfortable. So he thought a long blank hallway in a transit stop would be a great thing. And she didn't want that. She wanted shop windows and to have people around and to feel safe when she was walking around. And it's true, by the way, with eyes on the street, it is safer. So they did a wonderful presentation together by the end of the course and got married. And my point here is that public health was married to design 100 years ago. Because everyone knew if people were in bad physical environments, bad built environments, they weren't healthy. You didn't have to be an expert. Bad environments aren't good for your health. Poor people actually know that better than rich people, and we'll come back and talk about that in a minute. The book at the top is the companion book for the television series, and it's been shown in almost 5 million homes now in the United States on public broadcasting. And the thing about that is the demographics. The folks that watch public broadcasting tend to have more influence in their communities than perhaps some of the commercial stations. And so more and more communities in America are now beginning to realize that how we build is influencing people's health. This is the video series. It's 4 hours, and I'm going to present it to Maria Elena, and I'm going to ask you to make sure that you have people watch it over the next few months, because I think that your work here is so magnificent, your organizations. Thank you so much. So it is a pleasure to be here. So I teach at UCLA, and one day I was preparing for class, and I picked up the university newspaper, the Daily Bruin. And that day there was a full-page ad. And General Motors company had been doing focus group testing of young people. And when they do focus group testing, there's like a one-way mirror in this conference room, and they sit the people down and they ask them questions, and the folks on the other side of the mirror are going, they're picking up messages from all of this. Well, the message they got from interviewing college students was, well, actually the students, how's your life going? Oh, I've got so much debt. My tuition is so much. And my grades, they're not very good. And my girlfriend, she just dumped me. And my parents, they're not very smart. And I'm worried about getting a job when I graduate. And so the message that the people heard was, oh, reality sucks. That's a crude English word. I won't explain what it means, but kids use it all the time. Young people do. But it meant life isn't very good. And so General Motors decided, well, the way we could get life to be better for our young people, let me see if I can get the pointer to work here. Well, I won't try, is to stop pedaling and start driving. Go out and buy a $25,000 GMC Sierra, spend the next 7 years paying it off, and if you do this, pretty girls will not smirk at you when you are exercising, not polluting, saving money, and not adding to congestion. So I show this advertisement in the class. I made a scan of it, and the students are very upset. They start sending tweets to General Motors saying, how could you put this ad in there? Finally, one of the young women in the back of the classroom raises her hand. Dr. J, you don't know anything. She's not smirking at him. She's flirting with him. She does not want to be with the flabby guy driving the car. I think that underneath this is a message that the 20th century is so over, as my students would say. In the 20th century, we thought we could fix things by breaking them into smaller and smaller pieces. So environment became separated from health, became separated from the economy, became separated from education, housing, and transportation. And we'd fragmented everything, and then we made it deeper and deeper and deeper. And we also thought that the solution to everything was to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. So in my country, and to an extent Mexico, cars got bigger, roads got bigger. In the US, houses got bigger. Houses are twice as big as they were when I was a kid, and they have half as many people in them. And then we wonder why we're lonely, because we're living in these huge houses, sitting in a box, going absolutely everywhere, and our food got bigger. So if you go into one of the franchise restaurants and you order something, they bring out enough food for 4 people. And then we wonder why our bodies get bigger and bigger and bigger. And bigger is going to kill us. We have got to think about quality in the 21st century, and how do we bring quality into our lives instead of quantity. I'll tell you a side story, but I now can't remember to correctly pronounce the name of the restaurant, so someone help me. I got in late last night, and I went to a restaurant called El Güero de Canelo. So could you pronounce it for me?
El Güero Canelo.
And I said, I don't want to go to Chili's. I don't want to go to some phony Mexican restaurant. I want to go to a really good Mexican restaurant and have good food. And the man said, well, here, you should go here. And I had trouble finding it because it was probably an old McDonald's or something, and it had been painted. And I walked in, and there wasn't all the gleam and plastic and shiny stuff. And it was a little bit worn looking, but it was very clean. And the man at the counter was as nice as could be, and people stood there as friendly as could be. The food was superb. I could see the people preparing the food, and they had hairnets, and they're wearing gloves, and they were laughing and working and preparing food. And the people that came in were as joyous as could be. And I thought, oh my goodness, in the US, we would probably not want something like that. We would want something completely sterile and would generate money for someone way up in New York City and not for the people that were living in that community. And so I actually think that the model of locally produced food, locally grown and produced, is really where we need to be going. And my young people that were making fun of this, my students, half my students are vegetarians. A quarter of my students bicycle to school. About 10% are so-called vegans. They are buying their clothes in surplus places. My youngest son says, Dad, why would I go buy clothes in Target or someplace like that? It's overpriced, when in fact the clothes at Goodwill, I can pick stuff that's really good quality and costs 10 to 15 times less. And so I think the 21st century students are going, we don't want to live like 20th century people. I've just talked about this. One of the things that's happened in my country is we've stuck huge profit demands in between people and what they need. So we need food, so suddenly we put $14 billion of price supports into a year into corn production in the U.S. Oh, well, that's just the U.S. But in fact, it helped destroy corn production in Mexico because the U.S. corn became so cheap by comparison. Another way it made Americans fat. We've lost wonderful farmland to just massive agriculture at the same time, and we use lots of toxic chemicals. I think there's a reason we should be doing much more local agriculture, because you can't use toxic chemicals next to the school in the backyard. At least you shouldn't be doing it. And so we've seen that change as well. For 10 years, I was the head of the health effects of pesticides in the state of California. Every outbreak I ever investigated had 3 or 4 pregnant women, and probably 10% of children were in those fields at that time. And none of those standards for those chemicals were ever written to protect pregnant women. They were never written to protect children. They were all thought about. So we over and over we forget about the most vulnerable people in our society. We really ought to be using that as the benchmark for the decisions we make. What happens to our kids? Because what we do is going to have an impact for generations. Now, I'm a pediatrician, and so in the U.S., if you take your child or your grandchild, I'm sure this is true in Mexico, to the doctor, to the clinic, they're going to measure the height and weight. And they're going to say, they want to make sure the child's staying at the percentile. So if they're 50th percentile for weight, you want them to stay there, and 50th percentile for height as they grow. You don't want them going up real high or down real low. We're seeing 4 kids like this a day in the U.S., and I know Mexico has an obesity outbreak problem as well. Child comes in, looks okay, 50th percentile for height, the 50%, but the weight, 95th percentile, just much too heavy. If you're much too heavy, your blood pressure is too high. Your cholesterol is too high. Your blood sugar is too high. And maybe you're seeming a little depressed. Well, a good doctor will send the child to clinic, but probably the most important thing, and by the way, I think the Coca-Cola in Mexico tastes much better than the Coca-Cola in the U.S. You all know that because you don't use high fructose corn sugar the way they do in the States. But 1 Coke a week is enough. Nobody needs to be drinking more than that in a week. It's not good for you. It's not good for your liver. Child comes back a month, 2 months later, and what's changed? After all the advice, all the work you did, nothing has changed. And so 2 months after that, the child's taking something for his cholesterol, something for his blood sugar. So basically $400 worth of medicine to treat what I'm going to say is environmentally induced disease. So we're thinking medicine and drugs and medical care at the end of the disease pipeline is going to fix diseases that are basically caused by the way we've created our society. The environment is rigged against that child, against the doctor and the nurse, and it's against the population. And it becomes extremely expensive, thinking medicine is going to fix the mistakes we made environmentally, educationally, and every other way. Having the end of the disease pipeline fixing things is not going to happen. Oops. And spending all this money, my country is not any healthier for all the money we're spending because we're not spending it in the right things. And Mexico has done a great job. What are the 2 most important things you can do to improve the lifespan of human beings? They both in English start with the letter I. One is immunization. The other is infrastructure. Basically what you're talking about, how you build the world that people live in. Those are the two things. So in the first 50 years of the 20th century in the US, we added 30 years to the lifespan of the average American. 30 years. Now, if you ask a fancy doctor, 30-year improvement in lifespan, you must be a very good doctor. Well, the truth is it didn't come from the doctors. Only 5 years came from medicine. The other 25 came from immunization and infrastructure. Better homes, better water, better food, safer workplaces, better roadways. So in 1994, I moved to CDC and brought our 3 kids to Atlanta, and 3 boys, and began work there. It was a very hard job. The breadth of things was enormous, everything from atoms of lead. We did a lot of work in Mexico and Juarez and also other places around the migration of lead from the smelters in the refineries, up to chemicals in our environment, to climate change, to nuclear tests and other issues. And one day I was asked to come to the director's office at CDC and to talk about the leading causes of death in the 21st century. We're all talking about it. And I'm thinking these distant things, and I'm driving this highway right here. It's called Buford Highway. And you've got plenty of streets that look like this in Tucson. And I look over, it's 95 degrees, 95% humidity. I look over to the right side of the road, and I see an elderly woman, and she's walking along, and she's carrying a plastic shopping bag, one in each hand. And she's got red hair, and she looks like my mother. And I don't stop and give her a ride. I go to my meeting, and I'm thinking, if that poor woman collapses and dies, the cause of death will be heat stroke. And it won't be absence of trees, inadequate green infrastructure, lack of public transportation. And if she's killed by a truck going by, the cause of death will be motor vehicle trauma. And it won't be absence of sidewalks, absence of public transportation. What public health is about is looking at the causes of death. The causes of death are easy. A person got hit by a truck and they died. You can figure that one out. But if you're going to do something about it, you have to go back and look at the causes of why that happened. People say, oh, you're very political. When you start intervening upstream and you start talking about how we build our cars, how we build our roadways, how do we give transportation to poor people, it's political. In public health, we doctors need not to take over things, but we need to start, and we more and more assert that, look, if you build it this way, it hurts people, and we need to change this. So I'm going to skip this one because it doesn't work very well. After that insight, I went back and I wrote an article with a friend of mine, and I said, in the article, it was about 10,000 words, I said, how we are building America is bad for people's health. And it was published, it got quite a bit of attention. It was about 2002. And all of a sudden, 14 members of Congress of the United States wrote to the head of CDC. I thought they were going to compliment me. They said, fire Jackson. He's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He is saying that how we are building the United States is bad for people's health. Well, the boss calls me into his office. He says, Dick, you're saying how we're building America is bad for people's health. Where's your data? Oh, I don't need any data. I mean, it's obvious that, if there's no place to buy healthy food, that people aren't going to eat healthy food. If there's no fruits and vegetables are twice as expensive as in 1980, people are going to eat lots more sugar, fat, and salt and fast food. It's obvious if there's no place to walk, people aren't going to walk. It's obvious if half the parks in Atlanta you can't get into unless you have a car. Can you imagine that? Half the parks in Atlanta you have to drive to get into, and if you happen to be poor, disabled, and not have a car, you can't even get to the park. My boss said, Dick, you got to keep quiet until you have data. I said, well, there's hardly any articles. Nobody's really researched built environment and health. Thank you for turning the sound up, by the way. And so what's happened in the U.S. is we've done so many things to redirect the health of the United States people. I don't think I need to explain this one, Marilena. Here are the obesity maps in 1991, and Arizona's about 10% of the people are obese. Here's the year 1997, about 15% of the people in Arizona are obese. Here's 2010, 20 to 25% of the people in Arizona are obese. Mexico's actually been working about the same way. So we've added about 25 pounds, about 10 kilos, 12 kilos to the body weight of every single person in one generation. Go back and look at a movie from the 1970s and you're surprised how thin people look compared to today. Now, we tend to blame individuals for this happening. But one of the things I'm going to say is, by the way, for my Mexican colleagues, it is very American to blame the person when there is a problem, rather than to blame the system that has created the problem. So when I interviewed in Governor Schwarzenegger's office to become the head of the health department in California, and they asked me what my priorities were, I said my number 2 priority is the obesity epidemic. And I could see Governor Schwarzenegger, Mr. Universe, thinking, obesity. That's a personal decision. Thinking about the individual as making themselves obese. And I said, no. We have an environment that is obesogenic. That may be hard to translate, but is basically making people obese. We have an environment where we add antibiotics to food, and probably 5 of the pounds are from the antibiotics. And the way we grow animals in these feeding operations, these big, they call them CAFOs, where the animals are all concentrated together. We have to give them antibiotics because they're so crowded. We have obesity because we're adding hormones to the diets of these animals, and especially the female hormones make them bigger. We give hormones to cows. The Holstein cows produce 60 gallons of milk a day. They collapse after about 2 or 3 years because but the production, it's all about money. It's not about quality. About 6 of the pounds that we gained was removing people's legs from them. I'm making a joke here, but what I'm saying is, we have engineered walking out of America. In other countries, we so love the car, nobody walks. To buy a newspaper and a carton of milk 2 blocks away, people will get in the car. So about 6 pounds are from removing walking from our daily lives. And then we have companies that come out with things that, can you imagine buying something where you'd have to walk 7 hours to burn off 1 meal? And this stuff is very cheap to produce because it's sugar, fat, and salt. Now, obesity is bad for us, but it sets us up for the disease diabetes. And I'll bet there are 10 people in this room with diabetes, particularly delta onset diabetes, maybe more. This is a technical graph, but I'll explain it very quickly. I'm hoping this is the pointer. Oh, it is. As my body mass goes up, my weight goes up, my risk of developing diabetes goes up. So at my weight, I'm about 4 times the risk. I'm not proud of it, as it would be if I was skinny. If I were a woman, it'd be 16 times the risk. But look how dramatically the risk of developing diabetes goes up with obesity. Well, I'm going to show you the maps then for diabetes. Here's the map in 1994. Here's the map in 2001. And here's the map in 2007. And I apologize for being US focused, but this is what I do for a living. We've doubled diabetes in the United States in the last 15 to 20 years. 2% of all the money in the United States goes to just taking care of diabetes. It's shocking. It has major implications. You know, you think, oh, well, you know, I'll have to take insulin or do my blood sugar, but we're now seeing major increases in amputations because diabetes causes poor circulation. People lose their feet and they eventually lose their kidneys. When I was young, the fifth reason somebody needed a new kidney was diabetes. Far and away the number one reason for kidney transplants now is diabetes, need for kidney transplants. I'm going to skip these. So I talked about the environment being obesogenic, and I thought, bad food is cheap. I would say how we tell people to live is bad for us. So my students did this. They drove along Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles, and they looked at the billboards. By the way, Arizona has a lot of billboards. Look anytime for a billboard that tells you to do something smart or healthy. It's not very common. So here's a billboard that says, go see the movies, buy bottled water, get a smartphone, and buy a little beer. What do you think it looks like in a poor neighborhood? What do you think the billboards? Billboards are very effective ads, by the way. They're very effective. Twice as many billboards to start with. Here's something that's really bad for your liver. That's number one. More beer, fast food, and if you do everything the billboards tell you to do, go get stomach stapling surgery because the system will both make you sick and will make you medically, and then we wonder why we're endlessly chasing to fix problems. So this is, in a way, it really makes it clear it's an environmentally induced disease. It's economic and social and advertising and other kinds of environment. I told you I worked for the governor. This is a picture of when I was the Secret Service man guarding him. This is an event, actually, where we were arguing that we should have price supports. This is probably, maybe doesn't make any sense in Spanish. The United States government sends lots of money for people to go grow corn, soy, and commodities, and sends no money to grow fruits, vegetables, and things that are good for people. I would say if you wanted to pick what to support, we ought to be supporting stuff that's good for us, not stuff that's bad for us. So that was just arguing for that. Your body was not designed to metabolize fructose in very large amounts. Fructose tastes great. It's really sweet. It's much sweeter than table sugar. And only your liver can get rid of it. The other kinds of sugars, the rest of your body, your brain, your muscles can burn. Only your liver. So we're seeing children with liver disease from the amount of fructose in their diet. This is about money. It's about people not caring about the overall good of our society. When I was a young pediatrician, I would never see a child with type 2 diabetes, adult onset diabetes in the clinic. Now it's half the kids in the clinic. Half the kids have adult onset diabetes, and their survival is worse than adults, than the kids with juvenile. I apologize, I don't have this data for Mexico, but it's pretty shocking for the US. Here's a comparison of people in the prime earning years of life, 46 to 64, 20 years ago and now. Very valid sample. People reporting excellent health. Do you think it went up or down? That's a big change. People say I'm in excellent health. They're almost always right. All you have to do is ask people, and they're pretty good about telling you. 32% to 13%. People saying, can you go about your life without help? 9 to 14%. Big increase in people needing help to go about their lives. This one's shocking. Do you need a wheelchair? A cane? 3% to 7%. Go into Walmart and you see people in wheelchairs and canes everywhere. It's mainly the diabetes epidemic and the obesity epidemic. quickly, smoking went down, obesity went up, but you didn't know the next slide. We doctors have been telling people, you gotta walk, you gotta exercise, you have to do this. Guess how successful we have been? Terrible, not at all. No physical activity, dramatic increase in not exercising. So where I'm going with this is we've got to create environments that not only are green infrastructure and create the physical environment, we've got to create environments that are so appealing people want to walk. I was saying to the gentleman here, when I was young, a poor man, I hate to say it this way, but I was a student in California. I could get on the bus and I'd go to Mexicali and get on the train, go all around Mexico. And I remember being in Mexico for the posadas, and everybody was out walking, and it was very calm and beautiful. And the center of the villages would have the central square, and people would be walking, and people were exercising. Of course, they were working hard too, but they were exercising and didn't realize they were going to the gym. They thought they were just, flirting with the girls or something, Skip these. And this may be slightly out of order. Green infrastructure, and you've talked a lot about capturing water and that kind of thing. Did you talk much about the psychological effects of green infrastructure? Pardon me? Oh, okay. Thank you. That's why I'm here. Okay. These are the studies by my friend Bill Sullivan, very good friend. And these are studies in projects in Chicago and in St. Louis, housing projects. Turned out when they were building these places, they ran out of money about halfway through the landscaping. So half the place had green trees and vegetation, half of it had nothing. And then when people came in and said, I need a place to live, the number would come out and they'd be randomly assigned to one or the other. So they didn't get to pick where they went. I wouldn't want to live there. I kind of prefer living here. At least there's a tree and I feel welcomed. So Bill hired people from the community to do face-to-face interview surveys. It's very important to have people from the community participating in this study. And they went house to house asking people about their lives and how things were going. Here's one of the so-called hardened end of the Robert Taylor homes. See no greenery whatsoever. And the other side. So they looked at how connected people felt in that place. What were their social ties? And also looked at how they socialized. Did they know their neighbors? What was their sense of community? The more green, the more the social ties, the more they connected with other people. The more green, the more they socialized with each other and made friends. The more green, the more likely they were to know their neighbors. And the more green, the more they cared about their community. So there are all kinds of benefits from green infrastructure and capturing water and shade and cooling and all the rest. But the psychological stuff. The number 2 disease in America, I said number 1, but the number 2 disease in America is depression. Number 1 is dental cavities. And this is a really good antidote to the number 2 big costly disease. They then looked at crime. Everybody's worried about crime. And they compared, and they looked at the number of trees that were present and the rate of crime in those areas. And so here's with no trees. Oh, sorry. I think it left out. The computer, I screwed up. Basically, the more trees present, the lower the crime rate was in that area. The crime went down in the presence of vegetation, and I apologize that my computer messed up. Maybe it'll be at the end here. the graduate students would observe how many people are outside socializing. In Robert Taylor homes, the more trees, oh geez, the more people socialized. At the Ida Well homes, the more trees, the more people socialized. So people are saying, where's the short-term return on investment? It takes a while to capture the return on investment of people socializing, but boy, it's a good investment. Sorry. I think I scrambled these. Oh, I duplicated them. All right. How am I doing on time? Okay. This picture up here, this is the California state flower, and it works really well for a few years, and then pretty soon you need more highways to handle all the traffic, and so you add more and more highways. So now we have paved over the Los Angeles. It's really very, very difficult. 15% of the CO2 increase in the atmosphere, 15% of the carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere is due to removing vegetation, deforestation. 6% is due to concrete. So just go, remember you talking about permaculture? 6% of all the CO2 increase is from extracting limestone and running it through kilns at 2,000 degrees and driving off. It takes a huge amount of energy to produce concrete, and then you drive off CO2 to do it. So worldwide, 6% is all of this. And it doesn't work. So 100 years ago, you could get across Los Angeles on the trolley system in about an hour and 15 minutes. Now you can have the fastest Ferrari or car you could imagine. It would still take an hour and a half because you can't get there because building a community on cars doesn't work. In beautiful Tucson, my God, that street out here, Broadway, you could put a football field between the fronts of the stores at each side. It's just so enormous. You don't need to have roads that big. Having 25, 30% of your landscape under cars means that you don't have as much room for people. So putting all that concrete down, nobody likes it when it's hot. Asphalt, concrete makes it hotter because the trees are gone, but asphalt makes it even hotter. Why does asphalt make it hotter than concrete? Because it's black, and it absorbs the heat, and it stays hotter for much longer periods of time. So you can see that areas over the city where there's lots of buildings are much hotter, like 10 degrees hotter than places over vegetation. A technical slide, but the quick issue is, the hotter it becomes, the more air quality degrades. And what this is showing is, as you look at temperature, the ozone levels and the pollution levels go up as the temperature gets hotter and hotter. Anybody want to know another reason why the pollution gets worse as it gets hotter? Number one is ozone is produced in the heat and the sun, but what's another reason? What do people do when it's hot out? They stay indoors and they turn on the air conditioner. So huge amounts of CO2 and fossil fuels are being used to run those air conditioners at the same time. It's actually a very good argument for everybody to have solar panels and a very good battery to capture the electricity during the day and then use it when you need it. Having ozone levels go up puts you at risk of a whole series of problems, and particularly puts children at risk of asthma. The most common chronic disease in my country is asthma, particularly in children. So we had this big fight when I was in Atlanta with, I won't go through the details, but the trucking industry wanted more money for bigger roads. And the federal law said you can't get more money from the federal government for roads unless you come into compliance with the air pollution standards. You have to meet the air pollution standards. We're not giving you money for roads. So big fight, lawyers are arguing, engineers are arguing, and the Olympic Games came to Atlanta. And we were told no one can drive in downtown Atlanta. And traffic in Atlanta dropped by about 75%. Air quality got better by 75%. It was wonderful. It was lots of people. It was interesting. You know, it was lively. The air quality is better. Probably like Beijing during the Olympics, too. And one of my colleagues, Mike Friedman, decided, I'm going to go look at what happens to the emergency rooms, comparing the emergency rooms before the Olympics and after the Olympics, and see if, as the air got better, did people get healthier? And so it's a complicated slide, but basically they looked at children's visits to the doctor for asthma, and every single way asthma went down during the Olympic period. Now, if you were the trucking industry, they would say that's because they didn't want to go to the emergency room because they're having too much fun at the Olympics. And so he also looked at other things like broken bones, and they were exactly the same before the Olympics and after the Olympics, and it was the air quality improvement that made asthma go down. And it's one of the reasons that public health people need to look at these so-called natural experiments, because these lessons are politically very cogent. So it doesn't make any sense. I can talk to a politician about what happens inside the lung. I can talk to a politician about what happens in an ozone chamber study, but you actually see changes in the real life population. That really matters to people. This sounds odd. Everyone knows that rich people need poor people. Seems sort of odd. You know, everybody knows, somebody's got to do the work. Rich people need poor people, but poor people need rich people. And when we put all the poor people in one place, the quality of lives drops dramatically. The services drop, the policing, the garbage collection, the parks, everything gets worse. It's only when you have the old village style of mixture of people of various incomes that it serves everybody very well. So this cartoon shows that this would be something totally stupid to do, right? Is to separate all the poor people from all the rich people. And it's exactly the way we do development at this point. We stratify the income levels. So go look at all the housing they're building here, and you will find that it's very narrow strata. So in America, and maybe in some parts of Mexico, you can grow up poor and never meet anybody with a good income. And you can grow up rich and never, George Bush, never meet anybody that was poor. And this is bad, because if a lot of wealthy people think that poor people are poor because they're lazy and not very smart. Most people are poor because of where they're born, lack of education, lack of resources, or medical reasons. And so if you really want to break down some of these social barriers, you've got to think about housing. It doesn't happen simply with social workers. So if you talk to the average person in Phoenix and they say, I live in the suburbs because it's cheaper to live there. Well, this is what the city pays to support one house in the household in the suburbs, $3,500. Transportation, school buses, etc. What do you think it costs to support a household in the city? $1,400. Because you don't have to run the wires and the electricity and the police and fire and everything out so far out. So the infrastructure is much more easy to maintain. So from even the economic standpoint, creating high-quality, dense urban spaces makes sense not simply from sustainability purposes. It makes sense economically. It makes sense business. It makes sense in terms of transportation. This is how we build in America, by the way. And I apologize, but China is trying to imitate every foolishness America's done. Imagine you bought this house right here. It's a nice house, and you make friends with the people on the other side of the fence, and you say, hey, let's get together and we'll have a picnic for Memorial Day, and I'll bring the potato salad. But you can't really throw the baby over the fence. So you decide, well, I'm going to drive over because I'm bringing a bunch of stuff, but I don't know how to get there. So I go to Google. And I look up on Google how to get from my house to my neighbor's house 35 feet away. And I can drive for 17 minutes, drive 7 miles to get to a house 30 feet away. I know this is silly. I know it sounds like a joke, but underneath this joke, as with most jokes, there's a truth. And the truth is, we don't build for people. We build for cars. We build for a quick return on investment, the developer. And so if you remember nothing else, put people first. Create things for people, not for cars. And think about the return on investment in terms of long-term and all things like health and socialization. We do goofy things. Actually, my friend Howie took this picture in Atlanta, and this is another silly joke. It sounds totally ridiculous. Why would somebody build the sidewalks like this? It's because the street is maintained by the city, but the homeowner has to pay for the sidewalk. The homeowner wanted to obey the law, so he put a sidewalk in, but didn't deal with the purpose. And so one other political thing we ought to do is, why shouldn't sidewalks and bicycle routes have the same support that streets get? When did God decide that cars were more important than people? And we have to convince people that you've got to walk. Walking is the best treatment for diabetes the best treatment for diabetes is walking. I'm not joking. Works better than any drug you can take. You know, this poor dog is trying to train this person to get out of the car and go for the... And by the way, one of the things we tell people if you need to walk more is get a dog, because dog walkers walk almost twice as much as people that don't own dogs. We need to have schools that are local and not schools that are far away. When I lived in Atlanta, my sons went to a school that looked identical to this. Every time I looked at it, I thought it was a medium security prison. And they couldn't possibly, it was 5 miles away and there were no sidewalks. We built for the cheapest school we could and not built for the well-being of our kids. Now I'm going to skip this. Again, American focused, I apologize. Remember the obesity maps? Look where the most fit cities are and the least fit cities in the United States. This came out in the last 2 days. But over and over again, the stuff coalesces in the same places. Kids that walk and bike to school learn better, behave better, socialize better than kids who sit in cars going back and forth to school. By the way, they need less Ritalin and stimulants to study. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to stay with this one. So I'm in a university right now. I'm the lead for the built environment changes on the UCLA campus. We have a healthy campus initiative, HCI. So we were changing the diet in the cafeterias. The vending machines they've moved the food in the vending machines, the sodas in the vending machines. So the healthy stuff is all at eye level because human beings look at about this level to this level. And the stuff that's bad for us is down here and up here. And we've seen like a 30% increase in the rate of people buying water and stuff without sugar in it compared to this. We're raising the price on the bad food and the fried stuff in the cafeteria by about 25 to 30%. And reducing the price on the stuff, the salads that are good for us by that. And nobody really objects. It's really the marketplace saying, this is what we value. One of the things I'm the lead on is how to make the campus safer. So 20 is plenty. If you're a pedestrian and you're hit by a car going 20 miles an hour, you have a 5% chance of dying. If you're a pedestrian being hit by a car going 40 miles an hour, you have an 85% chance of dying. There's no reason to have speeding on a university campus. It ought to be about people. This is my climate change graph, and I'm going to probably skip a bunch of this. Sorry. The climate change talk is another hour. But look at the president gave a big speech at the I think it was the Coast Guard Academy on the threat of climate change just in the last day. Here's the statement from the World Bank: climate change threatens our existence on this planet. The World Bank, this is not a bunch of liberals. And the head of the World Health Organization, climate change is the defining issue. So Pope Francesco is coming out with his encyclical in October on climate change as a moral issue, and what are we doing to our children and our grandchildren. And the slide I skipped is, I was studying whether what we've done to the planet is child abuse. And it turns out it's not child abuse. It's child maltreatment. Child maltreatment is when you put a child in an environment that is more violent and they're not being protected. And that's what we're doing to future generations with our indifference to the amount of CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere. So how about some positives? And I'm sorry, I'm going to be more high energy. I'm sorry, I'm being a little low energy. Public health sounds boring. It's not. It's about creating conditions where people can be healthy, and it's political. We need to have a tax on stuff that's bad for us. We tax gin, we tax other things. We need to tax sugar. If you can afford $1.25 for a Coke, you can afford $1.35 for a Coke, and the 10 cents ought to go to support schools. Green infrastructure, yes. Okay, thanks. Should you buy organic? If you can afford it, yes. And I won't go through the data, but there's very good data that if you have food that has conventional food with pesticides, your urine levels are loaded with pesticides. If you go organic, it drops down, you go back up. If you can't afford it, it's still better to eat fruits and vegetables. We need to have health impact assessment. This sounds boring again, but we shouldn't make big decisions without. Right now we do environmental impact assessments, and we look at basically all kinds of environmental things. We don't look at human health. This is the report we did on the need for health impact assessment. This is not a threat to you who worry about environment, but it's basically saying we need to look at the direct, indirect, and cumulative health effects in environmental under the National Environmental Quality Act. So if somebody puts in a roadway and does an environmental impact assessment, and they don't look at health, chronic diseases, they're negligent, they're derelict. This ought to be against the law. We ought to find a smart lawyer to sue them. But if they're doing something good that's improving health, and they're making a change and there's a short-term negative like noise and dust, okay, we'll put up with it because we want to have positive things. We pediatricians think that children ought to grow up in environments where they have increasing autonomy, increasing ability to go about their lives. That's a statement from the Academy of Pediatrics. Remember I said that I told my boss there was not really any data to support what I was saying? Before 2003, the entire English language literature only had 58 articles that dealt with built environment and health. Article I just did. 600 articles. I can't keep up. And one of the bad news and good news, I was saying to Edith, the bad news is that now the students and the young people know a lot more about this than I do. The good news is I'm leaving behind a legacy of people that do. I'm almost finished here. The Institute of Medicine, the top doctors in the country in the United States were asked, what do we do about the obesity epidemic? They didn't talk about sugar, number one. They didn't talk about fat, number one. They talked about what you're talking about. Communities, transportation officials, planners, health professionals, governments should make promoting physical activity a priority by increasing access to places for such activity. You know, it's not great to be overweight or obese, but it's real bad not to walk and not to exercise. And anything we do that removes the ability for people to be active, to walk, to exercise, is reducing their life, their freedom, liberty, and their happiness. And it's deeply a threat. Skip this. I'd love to see the light rail be extended much further. I'm a little worried about the bicycles in that rail track, but they put light rail in Charlotte, North Carolina. They went back 2 years later and looked at half the people were taking light rail, half the people weren't taking light rail. They just happened to do a health survey of the people, both groups, and the people taking light rail thought they were doing it to save money, to meet their neighbors, to not be stressed, to read a book, to get to work on time. Turned out the people that were taking light rail lost 6.5 pounds because they were doing incidental physical activity to do it. So when somebody says, how can you quantify and figure out the costs? One big thing is, how do we begin to capture these health benefits, whether it's mental or social, other kinds of health? Because this should weigh on the scale as we're looking at capital improvements to really make the environment work better. Oh, I couldn't help but put my grandchild in. New York City built this thing called the High Line, the worst, lousy part of Manhattan, the Lower West Side, the meatpacking district. There was a train line 3 blocks above the 3 stories above the city for about 20 blocks. They turned it into a linear park up high. It's now the 10th most visited tourist destination in the world. And there's a big takeaway here, by the way, and huge economic improvement in the area once the High Line went in place. Whereas the art, music, and things that make people happy attract people, and it's a good investment. It just, you can't show the return on investment in a week or 2 or a year. Here's the highway going through downtown Seoul, South Korea. Do you want to have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine with your sitting there? They ripped it out and unroofed the river and created a green space that people wanted to walk and be there. You don't need to wag your fingers at somebody and say, you got to walk and exercise. They're going to be glad to go there. And so it's a place that people want to walk and be happy and to exercise day and night. Do you do a festival, a bicycling festival in Tucson? You do? Great. We have Ciclavia now. It's about, the LA is in Ciclavia. It's about once every 3 months. The last one had 200, on Wilshire Boulevard, had 200,000 people turn out and bicycle. And they always said something like, gee, I didn't know how nice people were. I didn't know that the buildings were so nice. I didn't know I could get downtown faster on a bicycle than I could in a car. And what's really going on here, it's less about the event and it's more about the culture change. It's people realizing that there are other ways to live and it can work very, very well. I'm going to actually thank my Mexican-American colleagues because when I worked in Sacramento, we have a 1%, if you build a building, 1% of the money has to go to art. There was a pretty ugly parking structure, not very interesting parking structure that's about 6 stories high. And a Mexican-American artist did a giant sun shield with, that is often an art piece, and it was the size of the building. People come from all around to take pictures of the parking structure. And it creates a warmth and a safety and a feeling of being in a place that people care. So art really matters. Actually, last one. Remember the guys that tried to get me fired? The builders? Well, this is their new report, 10 Principles for Building Healthy Places from the Urban Land Institute. And this is online. You can get it for free. And there are 10 big principles. Put people first, unlike the place that had to walk 7 miles, and make healthy choices easy. And this is, maybe as you build green infrastructure, think about how it makes it easier for people to be healthy rather than harder. Sorry, I'm going over. So, we owe our kids a world that is at least as beautiful, diverse, happy, and healthy as the one we were given. And by creating good physical environments, we can do that. Thank you so very much for your attention. I didn't go too far over.